Hi, I'm Jill Vitale-Austin with the Eden Alternative. Thanks for joining us today. I am here today with Chris Angevine, Denise Hyde, and Laura Beck. And we are here to talk with you today about our new, refreshed, renewed, revitalized 10 principles of the Eden Alternative. So let's get started. It was, over 2 years ago that we started a process guided by our Eden Alternative International Board of Directors to look at the identity of the Eden Alternative and really look at how do we make more of an impact in this world. We've done great work in our last 20, now it's almost 27 years, and there's so much more to do. And so we undertook a long and very in-depth process of asking people, what's your perception of the Eden Alternative? What do you think about what we do? And we've got a lot of raving fans out there, right? Our team knows that, a lot of raving fans. And so we talked to them. And we also talked to people that really weren't our raving fans, or I should say, are not yet raving fans, to really understand how people perceive us and to get insight on how we can do even better. And so what we learned from that process is that the foundation of what we do and what we've been doing for 27 years is strong, is solid. And we needed to update, become a little more relevant, contemporary, about the way we talk about what we do. And right, just like technology changes over time, our language has to change over time, and we need to have some reboots. So Denise, if you would you talk a little bit about, so some of the people watching might not know our very long history and where the principles came from. Would you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Dr. Bill Thomas worked as a medical director in a nursing home, and he realized things weren't the way he thought that they should be. And that's where he discovered loneliness, helplessness, and boredom. And he started implementing the project. It was part of a grant project in the state of New York. And he wrote a book back in 1994 about that called The Eden Alternative, Nature, Hope in the Nursing Home. And in that book, he kind of conceptualized these 10 principles or 10 ideas of like how he was going about doing what he was doing. And then in 1996, which is when I first got exposed to the Eden Alternative, he had changed that book into Life Worth Living, which is still in publication today. And if you go in there and you look, it's kind of the concepts that, an Edenizing community does this, and it has the 10 things that they do. It's not quite principle written yet. But by the time we got to the Eden Alternative Handbook, in 1999, when it was first published, he actually had them really written out as principles. And they were much more definite statements. And so that was in the 1999 version. And then they got written again. And so when we updated the handbook in 2004, the principles were written as they have been since then. So from 2004 to 2020, we've been doing the version of the principles that most of you are familiar with. So it has evolved. It has changed. We haven't stuck with the same wording. As time have changed, as more people have adopted it, the principles have moved with the times. So it's perfectly logical that now 16 years later, we're looking at them again going, what are we learning? Who's our audience? And let's make them really work for the elders of today.
Thank you, Denise. And I have to say, when we first started talking about how can we revitalize the principles, it was a little scary, right? I mean, it's intimidating because the 10 principles means so much to everyone that's involved with the Eden Alternative. And so it was a really in-depth process as part of this whole identity work that we did. And Laura, would you share a little bit about kind of what that process was and how we went about it, how we got over our fear and moved things forward, our intimidation with the whole thing?
Well, yeah, sure. Jill, the process that you just referred to at the very beginning, with basically a year-long close look at what our new brand identity would be for the Eden Alternative, there were several components to that process, and certainly this was sort of blended into the conversations and the discussions that we had. So that means that there were a lot of people who, in the end, ultimately influenced where we've landed today with these revitalized principles. And so among those individuals, gosh, I love how you mentioned the raving fans, totally some raving fans, but we really did engage people who didn't rave. And we felt it was important to, bring in maybe some of the doubting Thomases, as well as the people who are like, yeah, all the way what you're doing really rocks the world, and everything in between. So some of those people specifically were like Eden educators and Eden mentors, Eden registry members. I mean, obviously those are more inner circle people who've been engaged with us for a long time, but we reached out to collaborating organizations that we've teamed up with on things before. We reached out to organizations that maybe haven't been so engaged with us, that maybe didn't understand us as well. We also very clearly, had conversations during the brand identity process with our Eden Alternative Regional Coordinators who represent other countries other than the US. And without question, the home office team has been involved on several levels. And then there, of course, are the Thomases, Bill and Jude Thomas, the founders of the Eden Alternative. So they did, in the end, give a last look and let us know that we had their blessings. So we were grateful for that.
And that sure felt good. So why don't we have a short video to show you. So why don't we roll the video? Same vision, new vibe. It is perfect. Perfect description of what this is all about. And we haven't lost the intent, right? Because the foundation of all this, and over time, it has become even more apparent through research and what we have come to learn, that the foundation of the principles makes a lot of sense. And Laura, you want to talk a little bit about how it reflects what we've been doing all these years?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of a light touch here, because I think we'll be digging more deeply into what you're just asking here with some of the other things we wanted to talk about. The thing is that obviously over the years, we've been teaching for a long time. Obviously, we've been around for over 27 years. We've been teaching these concepts to people for a long time. And there's just no way that isn't an organic process. So as we're working with people, we learn a lot from our audience, from the people who take our courses, who work with us through consultation, what works in terms of how things land for them and what doesn't work. And so we've been all along distilling our message, really crystallizing the concepts so that people can really wrap their hands around them and make them their own. So in the background, we've been adapting and revising how we teach all along. And to be honest with you, the principals now are kind of caught up with how we've been adapting and refining the way we teach what we teach. One very simple example is, focusing on the domains of well-being as the foundation of true home in Principle 2. We've been teaching that for a while, but we haven't been saying it in our principles.
Absolutely. Thank you, Laura. And one of the big things that people will probably notice is that the principals no longer use the term elder in them. And let's talk a little bit about why that is. Chris, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure, Jill. I'd love to start. I think my take on this a little bit is that we have definitely noticed, like Laura was talking throughout the years, and we have learned from people and listened to them. And what we have found about the term elder is that there's some people that love it, elders themselves, and there's other people that don't. And, we're like, hey, that's great. Let's not call somebody something they don't want to be called, of course. But our definition of elder doesn't sit with everybody, including some people that we would call elders. So we, again, with updating and revitalizing and refreshing, we still use the word elder. That's never going away for us. And we love the definition of it. It was a conscious thought not to include that.
Thank you. Any other thoughts, Denise, Laura?
It was really hard to write that word out of the principles, but totally it's written into how we're going to teach and talk about it all the time. But yes, we need to reach everybody. We are learning in this pandemic that these plagues are apparent in everybody's life, and not everybody sees themselves as an elder, and some people never will, and that's okay. We need to invite everybody into the conversation.
No, I agree with Denise. It's such a beautiful concept, and it stretches the way people think about what elderhood is about. And we're not going to stop teaching that. But what we did with using the language of we and us in the revitalized principles that I think is so important is that we create the shared experience of what it means to be human beings together. And when we each get in touch on our own terms with a concept or an idea and how that touches us as humans, we're going to be way more prepared to show up for another human being, right? We're going to be way more tuned in. We're going to be way more empathetic. We're going to understand what that means from the core of our being, not just, it's a little otherizing sometimes when we talk about, well, this is what they're suffering from, as if we don't get it, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, thank you. And that's actually, one of the things as we've all been studying ageism more and more, and ableism, is that's one of the things that perpetuates ageism and ableism is othering people. Mm-hmm. And our common experience as human beings is we're all aging, right? And so these principles make sense for all of us. And so using that we language really mattered. And I just want to reiterate, it doesn't mean we'll stop using the term elder. And there are actually some of the cultures that we work with don't use the term elder in the way we have, because that term is reserved for certain groups of people. Like when I was in Australia, I heard a lot about that term is reserved for the indigenous people of Australia. And so this just opens it up, makes it more welcoming and inclusive of everyone. So that's why elder's gone. Elder is not gone. It's just not the term we're using in the principles anymore. The other thing that that people might really see is in Principle 2, it used to talk about people, animals, plants, and children. And that's not there anymore. Instead, we're making that connection with well-being. So let's talk a little bit about that. Denise, you want to take that?
Absolutely. So that's another change that happened over the years with the principles. Just to let you know, as we started working with people living with different abilities, we realized that just talking about children negates a whole lot of intergenerational possibilities. So we had recently, like within the last few years, changed principle 2 to say people of all ages and abilities, as well as animals and plants. So we'd already modified that a little bit, but it's still that thing that people grasp onto. It's still the thing that people most associate us with. And I remember, I know, I've seen the magazines when they came out with the pictures of the plants, animals, and it was like mind-blowingly unique at that time back in the late 1990s. But now everybody's kind of got on to the idea that people need companionship, and it comes in all kinds of different forms. People need opportunities to give care. It comes in all different kinds of forms. People need variety and spontaneity, and there's lots of ways to make that happen. So we are still going to let people know that we believe that people of all ages and abilities need to intermix. That's why we said inclusive, and vibrant includes the animals and the plants and all kinds of ways that people can find the antidotes they need to the 3 plagues. And we're not trying to limit it. The other thing I've learned from working with people is that not every unique group of people that come together and form a community to live together all want to interact with people of different generations. They don't all want animals. They don't all want plants. So the door needs to be thrown wide open to figure out, what does a caring, inclusive, and vibrant community look like for this group of people that are spending their time together. And so we will talk about them, but not to the extent that we have in the past.
Thank you, Denise. Laura, Chris, anything you want to hop in with on this?
I have something I could toss in there. I think this goes back to what I was saying about the us and we language, is that the way the Principle 2 is now written in the revitalized version, I feel like it really calls on us to move from the inside out, right? So when we focus on well-being and those 7 domains of well-being as the crux of achieving the solution statement, which Principle 2 is, then we're prepared to add those other features into our outside experience of life, right? I mean, obviously, Denise just pointed that out. So we have a more sophisticated audience now. People are more savvy around person-centered and person-directedness in general, whether they are engaged in our approach or not. And so it's time. It's time to really get people anchored in what really matters first, so that they can add the right features to enhance those experiences appropriately.
Thank you, Laura.
Chris? Laura, that's great. And Denise, Laura, I love what you said. And Denise, you took my one thought, which I love that you brought up. I love it. I guess the thing I would say is that I think it was you, Denise, that I heard once say that, pets, plants, and animals don't belong in a facility. They don't belong in an institution. And it really speaks back to what kind of culture that you need to create, these deep knowing relationships, make sure that the domains of well-being are being met. The other things that we teach, it's not, I know when I was teaching, I said, you just don't put a parrot in your lobby, or a bird in your lobby and walk away. You just don't put a plant in a windowsill and then it dies, right? We have to nurture, we have to create, we have to keep learning and growing and evolving into something that is able to accept these gifts in. And they are unique gifts. So that's what I was going with. Not everybody wants a dog, right? But if they do, we got to create the culture that's going to be able to support it, where everybody is involved, not just one person taking on the responsibility of caring for that child or the pet or the plant, right? So it's way more than just those 3 entities.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I bet we can pop in the link to the Eden Alternative domains of well-being in the chat box so people can look at that. The Principle 2 is really about connecting. And what our goal is to create an environment where everyone, no matter what our age is, no matter what our abilities are, no matter what our job is or role is in the community, to have well-being. And again, that might mean animals, it might mean plants, it might mean people of different ages, but that's not necessarily the case. So I think this is the essence of creating a person-directed culture, is not assuming that that's what will make everyone have that sense of well-being. So the other thing we really wanted to do, so you'll see that the wording is different, right? And we wanted to, and again, this is from feedback that we got from all of the people that we talked to, that we wanted to use language that reflects the changing times and engages an even broader audience. So does anybody want to talk a little bit about that? and I'll kick it off, if that's okay, since I'm not sure who was going to speak up on that. So one of the things that we heard from people is that I think this is really important, is if we aren't speaking to the people who are making decisions in organizations, right? The CFO, for example, and the CEO, those kinds of people. We can all day be inspiring the direct care partners, but if we don't have that organizational shift, then nothing really happens, and people end up getting frustrated. So we wanted to be able, and that's a hard thing. It wasn't that hard, trying to never lose our heart and that passion that's behind it, but also be able to connect to people on an intellectual level. Not that CFOs and CEOs don't have hearts, because that is not true, but really helping people to see how these principles can impact their organization as well, and having it be really clear. So any thoughts on where you saw that happening? Or
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it was time to, like you said, the research is now finally catching up with what Dr. Bill Thomas saw back in the early 1990s, that loneliness, helplessness, and boredom are deadly. That there is research that proves that the antidote is not found in the med cart. The antidote is found in rich, meaningful relationships. So all the things we advocate, the consistent relationships between employees and the people they serve, and all those things there's now documentation on it. So it was nice to be able to word the principles in a way that we know the data. We've seen the stories. We've heard the stories. We know these things are essential to bringing these things to life. So I like that we kind of like put a little bit of more of a meat to it, rather than just kind of like being this lofty thing that people can't wrap their heads around. I think the wording makes it a little bit more concrete, and yet there's still principles, and there's still more than one right answer as to how you get to that point. And so it's still an open audience, an open possibility for everybody, but this is where we're heading. And I think that brings the commonality and aligns people.
Awesome. Thank you, Denise. Chris, Laura, you want to jump in on anything?
Yeah, I'll jump in a little bit. I think the thing for me is the broader audience. I know in my career, I've worked in independent living, I've worked in assisted living, and I've always thought to myself, my gosh, we need to start talking about, the principles and the domains of well-being in these kind of settings as well, home and community-based services, right? So if I'm living in my home and I'm lonely, helpless, and bored, what is my care partner team, and what do they know about how to live a life worth living? So what I really like about these principles is that they are now speaking, they're not narrowing anything down. It's what we've known for a long time, but they're reflected through the words that we have chosen and the words that we have used, because there's so many people and places and organizations that have never heard of maybe person-directed care, culture change, or don't know how to put it into place. And we have a wider audience to get to for our mission.
Perfect. Thank you.
I would just piggyback slightly. Chris, thank you. I love that addition to the conversation. I learned about the Eden Alternative as a family member long before I started working with this team 17 years ago. And it was important to me that I saw myself reflected in that. And I know as we grow and expand and we have this new identity that we're wanting to develop more and more, that we do want to engage consumers more. We do want to engage people who are receiving services in different settings more. And so we were kind of, I was brought onto this team to help make that happen. And it's been a really hard lift to get people to see us as an organization that's focused on more than just congregate living. And so every step we take like this, right, where we refine the foundational frameworks like the 10 principles so that it reflects everybody, the more it shows we're really committed to that.
Oh, thank you. That is such a great point, Laura. And before we close out our special show today, let's talk a little bit if there is one thing that we have learned during COVID, it is how important these principles are and how much they matter. Who wants to talk a little bit about that?
I think it's been really hard. I think it's been really hard for all of us in our own personal lives to remember these things. But I think it's been doubly hard on people that do run congregate environments because of the assumptions people have about age and abilities and safety and how much we need to do that. And it's like, man, people need the Eden Alternative more now than ever. So I'm so glad that we've rewritten the principles. I hope this attracts a new audience because loneliness, helplessness, I cannot tell you, and Chris, you can reiterate this, the calls we have with our registry members, how many are saying, we're seeing people die from this.
Yes.
It's not COVID that's the problem. It's the separation from their loved ones. It's all these safety guards that we put in place. It's how fast the medical model rushed back in and overtook lives and sterilized everything. This is a really tenuous journey, and that's why Principle 10 says it takes wise leadership to create lasting and meaningful and sustainable change. Because it's how do you, stop, and keep that all from creeping in the door. So I think there's a lot of lessons learned that leaders that have been doing this for so long have learned over this last 8 months.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thanks, Denise. I'll speak to that with the registry members, and that the thing that's coming up is that phrase, right? The failure to thrive, and that is what we've heard. On the flip side, we've also heard organizations say, because of this, I understand, or people, a couple things. I really understand loneliness, helplessness, and boredom more than I ever have in my own life now. Another thing I've really heard people say is that how essential family is, how essential those family members are. Like, it's like that, you don't know what you miss until you lose it, something like that, right? So I think that people are really, this is strangely bringing people together in a different way. I think the last thing that I've really heard a lot through COVID is that there's many places that I've spoke to and said, thank goodness we knew about person-directed care and that we had the Eden Alternative. We understood the domains of well-being to fall back on through this time of COVID, because I don't understand how we would have been able to balance that safety and infection control in the way that we have without that understanding how important addressing the plagues of the spirit are. So, yeah.
Absolutely, Chris. To just, again, piggyback on you, I think the challenge that we've always had, and it feels even more pronounced during this challenging time, is how difficult it is for people to let go of programmatic thinking. So if you look at our new principles, our refreshed and revitalized principles, they're not new. Please look at them through the lens of, this is something I can incorporate into how I show up in my world, in my work, in my relationships every day. I can bring it in a little at a time until it feels more like riding a bike, right? We have a tendency to compartmentalize things. Oh my gosh, I got to add this on top of this now. How's that ever going to work? And when Chris pointed out that people were saying, I'm so glad we had these things in place before this happened. Don't wait until a crisis to understand how important these concepts are. Sooner rather than later will set you up for those times with success like you will never imagine. The thing we teach is that the Eden Alternative is not about adding to what you already do, but doing what you're doing already differently. And so that's what the principles give you the opportunity to do, is to be prepared for the times when you're already automatically living and acting from that frame of reference.
Perfect. Thank you. What a great way to close out this time with everyone today. Thank you. We've had a number of people that have popped in and have been watching, and we can respond to questions in the comment box after this show is over. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Laura. And thanks to everyone who was involved in this this journey to revitalize our messaging and what we put out in the world. Have a great day.
Bye.